so for anyone watching this online, this is earlier than normal, 3 hours actually, earlier than our normal time getting together. This is because I accidentally double booked something without even knowing it, and I had to maintain a commitment that I made elsewhere. It was unintentional, but I just rolled with it. So anyway, so we have fewer people than normal tonight, which is probably a good thing. Like, honestly, like, we have a lot to do today. So let's go ahead and, like, we did Matthew 1 to 7, but there's a few things I want to say. So I'm going to say something first about the Sermon on the Mount, and then we're going to backtrack one quick thing. Forgot to mention this. So notice that it's called the Sermon on the Mount. Where was it that Moses got the beginning, like, of the code from? Is on top of a mountain. It's a similar idea. So we're talking about the signs of Christ being the Messiah. In the first place where he starts giving his message is on the top of a hill. And so we were talking about, like, the meaning behind it, also with him being in the wilderness, just like with Egypt. And then him coming out of Egypt, although we were also talking about the dichotomy where it's Israel, the king of Judea, is serving as the, I guess you'd say, the antagonist rather than the leader of Egypt, which is a reversal. And so we're talking about, like, a lot of similarities, but a lot of reversals at the same time. A lot of these reversals will take place in the worldly stage when you have a lot of the things that remain preserved are from the godly stage, such as giving something on top of a mountain. That's still preserved in that sense. The message is still very much the same as what they received thousands of years before Christ, and actually about 1,000 years, something like that, before Christ. But it's more like he's, like, setting the record straight. And without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about his birth once again. His birth was interesting in terms of, we talked about the Magi. But it's funny because right after we had our last session, something really cool happened. A friend of mine who is not related to this Bible study sent me a video. And if you remember right, I talked about, I have this book that I still have yet to finish because I am a busy person. So,
can they hear you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they should be able to. All the way over there, yeah, no problem. So, this book, I've talked about it before. This is where I got the information about a lot of the imagery. And it's by Dr. Michael Heiser. And I got a video link from someone who also has read this book. Totally unrelated to this Bible study as well as to, like, any other, like church or any church I attend. Totally different person. But it was funny because I got a link and he released this video a week ago. It's really interesting because we were just talking about the Magi. But before I do anything, I wanted to clarify something. As is inferred by their name, they're not only astrologers, they're also sorcerers. The whole idea is that they would be the people to whom royalty would turn to see how things would go. If you remember right, there's plenty of stories of this, like in the Old Testament, such as like in Numbers. The concept of, like, people trying to, like, kings trying to get, like, divine, I guess you could say, information, or how things are going to turn out. The Magi definitely serve this purpose. And it's funny because they are representative of the nation, which is supremely interesting that the Magi, sorcerers, were part of Christ's like announcement as being king. It's quite interesting, especially when you think about, like, all the other stuff that like how people are told not to do sorcery in terms of the people of Israel. It is a clear-cut example of the separation of Israel from the other nations. However, that the other nations do play a role in terms of God's ultimate purpose. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show something really cool. I want to show this video first, and then we're going to talk about some other stuff going on. just listen. If you can't see the, for the people who are, there's only one person on the phone, just listen. It'll be on YouTube later, so you can reference it. I'm going to go ahead and get it ready to go, and it's only 10 minutes long. It's super cool. And remember, it's the guy that wrote this. So I really like his sources, and we're going to talk more about source material later. So here we go. Let me turn everything up to make sure it's ready, because this is ready for video game usage instead of video usage.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar that the Qumran people used is the only calendar in the ancient world that creates a time window for the Messiah's arrival that matches Jesus. Okay, I don't think that's a coincidence. This is a zodiac mosaic in a Jewish synagogue. There are a lot of these, a couple dozen of them, that archaeologists have found. And you would look at this and say, well, you know, these Jews must have been pagans then. No, they had a different perception of what was going on in the sky and who's in charge and what it means, as opposed to the pagans. Pagan astrology, astronomy, there really wasn't much of a difference in the ancient world, is more like what we think of today with horoscopes, the individual birth signs, you know, when I was born, what day, what's going on, that determines my fate, it determines my personality, it determines the outcomes of my life. No, it doesn't do any of those things. The Jew would say that's heresy. Only God is sovereign. What you can tell, though, is that God is working a plan, because God's plans are linked to time. So we need to be paying attention to what the skies are doing, because they might tell us something about what God is about to do. The people who were really into this would be the people at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. They have a number of astronomical texts there. They track this like, let's put it this way, they separated from the Pharisees. They thought the Pharisees were liberals because the Pharisees used a calendar they didn't like. So, you know, we hear that and we think it's crazy, but they were that serious about it. But I want to move from this idea that there was a Jewish conception of the skies were important, what's going on here, because they telegraph certain things, to Revelation 12. Now, I can't prove this, but I suspect that what Paul was thinking, we actually have recorded in Revelation 12. But John, in Revelation, says this. You know, several times he says, I looked up in the sky and saw. What if John actually meant what he said? What if he's keying parts of Revelation to astronomical signage? What if he's doing that? A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Okay, verse 5 is crystal clear. It's quoting a messianic psalm. Okay, it's quoted elsewhere about Jesus. This is a reference to the birth of the Messiah. The notion of being caught up to God and his throne is a notion of the resurrection and ascension. But before that, you get all this astronomical imagery. Now, I'm not the first one to suggest this, but I suspect very strongly that this is what Paul was thinking about when he said, hey, have people heard about, the Savior? Heard, what's going on here? And, again, you'd expect him to say no, and he says, well, they actually have. And then he quotes Psalm 19. See, Revelation 12 doesn't exist yet. Okay, Revelation is the last book of the New Testament, but he quotes Psalm 19 and says, yeah, they've heard. The heavens declare the glory of God, so on and so forth. All these verbs of communication. Paul is associating the knowledge of the Messiah King, his arrival, with something going on in the skies. That much we can say. And Revelation 12 gives us a pretty easy thing to track in an astronomy program. Now, I'm going to go through some of this. But before I do it, let me say what I'm not saying. There are those in evangelical circles, their belief was that you could look at the constellations of the skies and they told you the entire plan of salvation. Like they went through the Romans road to the heavens. Don't believe that. Okay, that overclaims the data. What I do believe is that, like the Magi, there's something going on at a certain time in history that told them there's going to be a divine king born in Bethlehem. Saddle up the camels. We have to go to see. The Jews would have noticed it. Gentiles, like the Magi, would have noticed it because they were watching. And they believed that the Creator God, the God of Israel, was capable of telegraphing stuff like this. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar that the Qumran people use is the only calendar in the ancient world that creates a time window for the Messiah's arrival that matches Jesus. Okay? I don't think that's a coincidence. So, having said that, let's get into what I think we can claim. On your screen, you see a few things. There's the sun and the moon, and then there's a line. The line is called the ecliptic. This is a line that astronomers will draw to track the movement of the constellations. You notice the sun and the moon there. The sun is in the midst of the woman, the Virgin, Virgo. Okay, and Virgo, again, there's different ways to understand the 12 stars around her head, depending on which astronomer, you would read. That you can get 12 stars in this or that method. But again, she's the woman with the 12 stars, the virgin who is about to give birth. The sun is in her midst. It's Revelation 12. And the moon is at her feet. You'll notice above her head, I've let my astronomy program show Regulus and Jupiter. Now, they are not mentioned in Revelation 12, but if you put the information in Revelation 12 into an astronomy program, this is produced. What's the big deal about Regulus and Jupiter? Jupiter was the king planet because it's the biggest one. Regulus was viewed as the king star because of its brightness. And here, they are overlapped. They are superimposed on each other. If you are one of these old, ancient astronomy guys, that's going to draw your attention because both are associated with kingship. Constellation Virgo is the only constellation that represents a woman. For 20 days, Virgo was clothed with the sun. But the exact day when the moon was under her feet at the same time, and by the way, when Regulus and Jupiter intersect, and this is the view over Jerusalem, by the way, that could only occur during an 80-minute period within those 20 days. Okay, astronomy is linked to time, so we can calculate. You'll notice I put the stick figures in now for the constellations so you can see this a little better. We've got in the center there, that's Virgo. She doesn't look as attractive as a stick figure. Sun, moon at her feet. Jupiter and Regulus co-joined. And what is the constellation above Virgo? It's the lion. It's Leo. What does that mean to a Jew? The lion is the sign of what? The tribe of Judah. Okay? Judah. Regulus and Jupiter are intersecting in Leo. What was that king, what tribe was he supposed to be from? Oh, yeah, Judah. And you notice below her feet, In modern astronomy programs, we have two constellations. One is Libra, the other is Scorpio. In the ancient world, they were one constellation, and it was like a scorpion with pincers. And scorpions were at times referred to as a dragon, but you have another option for the dragon. That is Hydra, also located below Virgo, but off the ecliptic. Doesn't really matter. You got two choices. Okay? He's ready to devour the child when the child is born. There's a small window of time when all of these things are present. September 11th, 3 BC date also corresponded, what a coincidence, to Rosh Hashanah, Tishri 1, New Year's Day for Jews, and the Day of Trumpets. Tishri 1 was also the New Year's Day of the civil calendar, according to the calendar accepted in Judah during the divided monarchy. In other words, it marked the first day of the reign of every new Davidic king. What a coincidence.
Yeah, it's interesting. But anyway, one thing I do actually, a couple of things I want to do to clear things up. Yeah, the whole Hydra thing, it's funny, it's like, I can see his point, it could be either or. I think it's interesting, though, that Hydra is also seen as the chaos monster in many cultures. But anyway, I personally think it could be either or. Now, let's talk about dates for a second, and I think it's interesting. Does anybody know the general date for Herod's death off the top of your head? What year? I'm going down a path here, so I'm kind of like leading the questions. So, do you know?
Not sure, but about 2 BC.
4 BC. Yeah, yes?
I was just going to say no.
Yep. So you didn't know? 4 BC. When was the census of, was it his name, Quirinius?
Yeah, Quirinius was governor of Syria.
When was his first census, according to history? Like, as far as, like, is what?
4 BC, was it? 6.
AD 6.
Or 6 AD.
Mm-hmm. Notice that things aren't matching up here.
Yeah, right.
And so what's funny is I did some digging, and it's really interesting because history is, when it gets to something as far back as that, it can get fuzzy very quickly. It's not like how we know the exact date that certain things happen with most things, like today, like within the past couple hundred years. It gets fuzzy, and it gets fuzzy very quickly sometimes when it comes to other dates, especially more into antiquity that we go. For example, if you look at like the dates of pharaohs, it's always like a question mark. It's like there's always a C, meaning circa, right before the date, and it's like saying possibly this year. So when we are encountering Herod the Great, who ruled over Judea. Actually he was not, because his son became the tetrarch and his other son was the ethnarch. And anyway, so I did digging. So I believe it's Josephus. I might be wrong, but I'm going to present the information. If you guys need more clear-cut information, I can easily find the sources again. But I'm just presenting it the way I understand it. I believe it's Josephus that wrote of the date of Herod's death, and apparently it was in the 22nd year of Tiberius's reign, and so it was written as the 22nd year. The 22nd year would have been right around 6 or 5. Remember BC, so we were talking about 6 or 5, somewhere in there. And but the thing is, though, it's like that is the version that we have today. The older that we go into, remember when we were talking about Goliath's height and it changed over the centuries? It was originally like 4.5 cubits, and it became 6.5 cubits. It's something like that, and so you have a very similar thing happening here. That number 22, the oldest manuscripts that we have dated, I think, the actual manuscript dated to something like 1500. Like that's like because a lot of the other stuff was lost. The oldest ones that we have say all but 2 of them. There's like 20 of them, and all but 2 of them say 20th year of Tiberius's reign. And so instead of the 22nd year, it's the 20th year of his reign. And that's so just like with Goliath, like it was more than likely written down as like 4.5, and then it later changed. Either like something happened. So if you do the math, it's right around 2 or 1 now. I'm sorry, not 2 or 1. I'm sorry. Later. Sorry, 3 or 2. Sorry, like I'm doing math and really fast. It's either in the year 3 or 2. And some people think that Herod died in 1 BC. And there's a weird, there's a lot of speculation that goes into that. But the thing is, though, I tend to go with the idea that it was 20th year. I'm sorry, well, I'm sorry, I just made the numbers wrong. It said the 20th year originally, but all but 2 manuscripts said the 22nd year. Sorry, you get my point though. It was the manuscript was off by 2 years. And
for what?
For Tiberius's reign.
No, for what happened?
When Herod the Great died. So it was.
I'm wondering if it's the 22nd year of Augustus' reign.
It said Tiberius.
Was it really?
Yeah, because Augustus verified who would be the. Oh, was it Tiberius? Okay. All right. Now I have to search because now I'm starting to get confused.
Tiberius became emperor after Augustus.
Hold on.
In 14 AD.
Hold on. I have to find it now.
Because remember, it was Augustus.
Hold on, I'm trying to. 20th year of Tiberius. Yeah. 20th year of Tiberius. Oh, no, that was Philip's reign. No, Tiberius was later. So when was I thinking? Okay, so this is from Wikipedia, but just listen. Most scholarship concerning the date of Herod's death follows Emil Schurer's calculation, which suggests that the date was in or around 4 BC. And this is 3 years earlier than the previous consensus and tradition. 2 of Herod's sons, Archelaus and Philip the Tetrarch, dated their rule from 4 BCE, though Archelaus apparently held royal authority during Herod's lifetime. That is true. I did search that. Philip's reign would last for 37 years until his death in the 20th year of Tiberius. There we go. That's it.
Yeah, so Philip died.
So we're talking about Philip. Yeah. Which implies his accession as 4 BC. Some scholars support the traditional date of 1 BC, yet others support 1 CE for the probate date of Herod's death. Some people propose that he died in 1 BC and that his heirs backdated their reigns to a certain overlapping, but in Josephus' account, Herod's death was preceded by a lunar eclipse and followed by Passover. A partial eclipse best observed from the west coast of Africa took place on March 13th, 4 BC, about 29 days before Passover. While this eclipse has been suggested as the one referred to, there were other eclipses during this period, with proponents of 5 BC and the 2 eclipses of 1 BC occurring on January 10th being the only total lunar eclipse and the most spectacular. And December 29th, another only partial eclipse. Objections to the 4 BC date include the assertion that there was not nearly enough time between the eclipse on March 13th and Passover for the recorded events surrounding Herod's death to have taken place. And I'm trying to remember, there's something else about the 20th year.
Yeah, and the next line says Augustus respected
the term. Yeah.
So he died during Augustus' reign.
Yeah. Because when you mentioned Augustus, I was like, wait a second, Augustus was the one that actually told his son.
Yeah, and Augustus was the emperor that taxed, that made the tax, and they had to be registered for the tax.
Hold on, one second. I'm also looking at the manuscript thing. Hold on. Oh, okay. Okay. This is now in Bible Archaeology.org, but wait a second. Tiberius. Okay, wait a second. King Herod Philip died in the 20th year of Tiberius, after reigning 27 years over Galatatius. But then you have, so you have the 20th year. Okay. Instead of placing, and there's other things that say, instead of placing the death of Philip in the 20th year, put it in the 22nd year. This year difference is evidence in favor of dating Herod's death to 1 BC. So this is, and it's like, there's a lot of different things with the manuscripts, and out of like and I remember reading particularly somewhere that out of the 20 earliest manuscripts, only 2 would have placed it at 4 BC, and all the others would have read it as 1 BC.
Yeah, so Augustus was Caesar when Jesus was born.
Right, and I knew it was
here when Jesus was crucified.
You're right. But I knew the dating had to do with Tiberius. And another thing too, Quirinius was already a ruler over Antioch. And the thing is, though, in Rome, a census was taken every 5 or so years. You have an official national census that was taken in the year 8. I think it was 8 or 6. It was one of the 2. And I'm talking about CE. Like about 10 years after what we've been talking about, right? So, but the thing is, though, it's like getting like a calculation of things for tax purposes was often done much more. Like think about like how often like we do the IRS stuff like every year, right? Like, and if we're talking about Rome, they had to have some sort of general count of things. So there's an idea that Quirinius had the permission to get a count of the population over whom he actually had that, and that's why Luke particularly said that this is the first census taken under Quirinius, because you had Quirinius, and it's like, but the thing is, though, if you mentioned the Great Census, that would have been, but he said the first census. And the next one after that was like I think 14. So I can understand the discrepancy there, but I do believe that historical records, to me, there was a long gap between the 2 censuses of the 2 censuses during Augustus' time, and so it was definitely, to me, I feel like there's definitely room for him to have made a count. Not especially because he ruled over Antioch at that time. He wasn't, because they had a special name for him. He was more like a magistrate, but he definitely had power over the territory. And so, basically, the concept of so if indeed the dating does go to 1 BC for Herod's death, as well as to Quirinius having like a census taken, like when he ascended to power in Syria, it makes sense that this whole September 11th, 3 BC thing would definitely make sense. Absolutely, like with the sign of like the Feast of Trumpets. Not to mention the concept of not to mention that like it also kind of like falls in line with Mary's travels, like when she saw Elizabeth. I actually read an article that actually didn't make sense to me. Talking about how Mary had to have gone back during spring, and that didn't make sense to me because with Mary already having been pregnant, when she saw Elizabeth, it made more sense that she saw Elizabeth like just as spring was starting to break. So that it was something like that. I forget. I have to do like, if you need more concrete information, I can easily look it up. But I remember looking at like certain like it's a hot topic. It's definitely a hot topic in the research field of things. I have to say though, this particular video, when it comes to anything related to anything I've ever seen about anything having to do with dating things, this has, in my opinion, now I'm willing to hear like opposing opinions. In my opinion, is the most clear-cut and concise way of looking at the astrological signs at the time. I think it was very well researched. Not to mention, it's like when I look at this book, it's like I only disagree with his opinion like twice so far. And what I'm saying is like he really puts a lot of research into this. And I think what's interesting too is that he's the type of person that doesn't try to fish out the answers he wants. And I think that if he were to present this, he would only present this like when he had a very strong, like I guess you could say in his own like very strong what's the word I'm looking for, like belief in what he was presenting. So I wasn't trying to fish for anything.
Can I make an observation? Now, I'm thinking that the Chaldeans, you're talking about seeing his star. It would make sense. This is just something that would make sense. That if they saw the convergence of Regulus and Jupiter as his star, it would make sense because it was in Leo. So it was the loyalty of Judah. It would make sense then that they asked, where is he this born king of the Jews?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because if you had Jupiter was seen as the king planet. Regulus is already part of Leo. It's like a star within Leo. And so, like, when Jupiter goes in front of Regulus a lot, once every 12 years or so. And sometimes it does retrograde motion on top of it. Retrograde motion for a planet is like when you're looking out and you can, it kind of like does this over time. And the reason is because it has to do with the relationship of how we're traveling around the sun. And like because of that, Jupiter might be moving like this, and then you have like, so as the Earth is going around like this, you'll notice it'll slow down and then it'll kind of backtrack, like in terms of like, because Jupiter is taking so much of a longer time, the Earth is going to pass it. And based on our perspective in the sky, it would kind of just do that in the optical illusion. And they were known for they were called planets because of this. Planet means something like rogue or something. I don't remember. I think what like wanderer. Like wanderer. There we go. And it really they were known for doing that. And Jupiter was known to also do that right in front of Regulus. And because actually pretty much any point over Jupiter is it'll stop, and the fact alone that it goes in front of Regulus would just make it like it would often stop there. So anyway, but that combined with the whole the sun going through the Virgin at exactly that point, the moon only having 80 minutes right at sundown during the Feast of Trumpets, which heralds a king. It's like all these things put together like this. I'm like, yeah, that's really, really something to ponder. And really, in my opinion, the most, I guess you could say, conclusive sort of, you know what I'm saying, like the most like concrete type of example that we got going on for us. And so I also just wanted to present it in such a way, and yeah, it's really cool. But I did want to mention one thing, and it's funny because I actually got a little bit worried there for a second. I did want to mention one thing. It's funny. If indeed Craig's birth is September 11th, it's really funny because someone in our group has a birthday on September 11th. But anyway, oh, she's gone. But anyway, yeah. Stephanie, who has been part of our studies, her birthday is September 11th. That's pretty funny. But anyway, so the mom or dad, do you guys have anything that you guys wanted to say regarding this?
No, I'm just kind of feeling excited because it's a vindication. I thought for a long time that Jesus would have been born around the Feast of Trumpets because of what it symbolizes.
Yeah, I remember Dad saying way back when I was a kid, something along the lines of the Feast of Tabernacles. I didn't hear him say Feast of Trumpets. I always heard fall. So so I wasn't sure if, like,
we had heard, too, at one point about someone had done the calculations in the Zechariah, the line of the priest that Zechariah was in, and figured out his rotation. And the way it lined up was that with the times of them being pregnant and Mary going to see her, Elizabeth, blah, blah, that Jesus was then born in the fall.
So we got the same conclusion then. Okay, because this is exciting to me. I legitimately read this article that said he could have never been born in the fall because of such and such dates. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't make sense. The amount of months was perfect for it to have been in fall. And I'm like, there was like an argument saying that what was it, that Mary was 3 months pregnant by the time she saw Elizabeth? And like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, because she said immediately after she heard these things, she ran to see Elizabeth, and she went to the hill country. So that was the thing I've always known. But anyway, hold on 1 second. So anyway, I didn't know, like, it seemed as if Stephanie was trying to say something, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, astronomically speaking, it makes perfect sense. With the placement of Regulus and Jupiter and the placement of the quote-unquote dragon, which is just Scorpio connected with Libra, which forms the dragon. I mean, it makes perfect sense. The symbolism is all there, and the timing is all there. And it's beautifully explained. And I love this because I never understood this section of Revelation. And now that makes perfect sense because, you know, it just all lays out beautifully. I just wanted to add that.
I think what's interesting, too, is the concept of, how would I describe this? We've been talking since the spring about the whole idea that that a lot of people put way too much into Revelation regarding regarding hellfire and brimstone and the world type stuff, right? And so a lot of people read a lot into like the whole virgin giving birth thing, and it's like, that's really cool if this is indeed what's being referred to. Because it's in the past tense. So now I don't know if it's like Zechariah, like where in chapter 3, like this is a preview of things to come. But it is interesting that like in the same book, in Revelation, he says, I'm going to show you the things that were, are, and have yet to be. So I'm wondering if this is an example of things that were or are. Anyway, so in Revelation 12, though, I'm looking here. I'm old school. Pages. Yeah, here we go. I'm 1 page away, and these things are sticking together. Come on, let's do it. We can do it. Okay. Then I witnessed in having an event of great significance. I saw a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon beneath her feet, and a crown. Yeah, it just seems as if it could definitely have been something like that. Now, when it comes to later on, and it's talking about the dragon lost the battle, I'm really thinking that things are being superimposed on one another. That's the way I'm taking it. And it's something that, thank goodness, we have several weeks before we even touch Revelation. But I'm super excited about the possibility. I already have a different view on Revelation to begin with, in contrast to a lot of hellfire and brimstone type stuff. And that's only been a recent development in the last few years. So I'm definitely looking at things differently in terms of like prophetic imagery. Hey, you guys have anything else you want to add before we go on further in?
One more thing too.
No, I can't see that.
Just a logical type of argument for the fall. As far, not that this is illogical. I think this is really cool, and it's more scientific evidence. But just the fact of Jesus being born on the day that foreshadows his coming as Messiah, the Feast of Trumpets, given that he was also crucified at the time of the Passover, which was the sacrifice. It would just make sense that he was born on the Feast of Trumpets.
Right. It would only make logical sense in that. And I think we have seen God work in similar ways before. This is not out of the ordinary by any stretch of the means. But I think it's funny, too, though, that astrology, it's just, and then, like, seeing, like, that zodiac sign with, like, Hebrew letters written on it, I was like, I never knew that. So this is actually new information to me as well. It's brand new. And I think it was ironically funny that we just talked about the Magi. And we just talked about the Magi, and someone sent me that. It was so funny. It was so funny. And not to mention, he released it a week ago yesterday. Wow. And so, wait, let me check it. He actually released it a week ago yesterday, I think it was. And then, like, of all things, on YouTube,
how do I really feel about health insurance?
October 4th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that was last week. So, come on. Like that, it's just funny, like how certain things line up that way. So, before we move on, we talked about, and we really super condensed the Sermon on the Mount, like a lot. So I was wondering if there was any final comments that anyone wanted to make regarding that before we went on. I have not received questions throughout the week. I know that there are a couple out there, and I'm willing to go backtrack like we did today to talk about the Magi. I'm willing to backtrack again. But I didn't know if anyone had anything pressing from last week that they wanted to cover. Okay. Starting in Matthew 8, you have the begin. Yes? Oh, sorry. Oh, we're good. Starting in Matthew 8. So remember, all the way until the end of 7 is just the word. There are kind of signs, like with like him getting baptized by John and all that stuff. But in 8, this is Matthew's way of formatting it. In 8, you have the beginning of Christ performing wonders. I forgot one thing, though. One thing just shot in my head real quick before we even get into that. Is remember when we're talking about like the dates and how things can get kind of fuzzy? One thing that isn't all too fuzzy, though, is the gospel accounts themselves. We talked before about like how there are only a few thousand manuscripts, for example, of the Odyssey or the Iliad or anything like that. Homer's oral poetry, but there are tons more. Like, and I mean like a gigantic amount more when it comes to the Gospels. And when these things were written, were only a few decades after the fact. Josephus, I mean, this is much later, was just basically compiling information to draw back into the dates. What I'm saying is there is more textual evidence in terms of like how much the New Testament stays together in terms of text versus like how much other documents were proliferated at that time. So I just wanted to make that point. But anyway, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at 8. So I will go ahead and read some. So Matthew 8, verse 1. Large crowds followed Jesus as he came down the mountainside. Suddenly, a man with leprosy approached him and knelt before him. Lord, the man said, if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing, he said, be healed. and instantly the leprosy disappeared. Then Jesus said to him, don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you've been cleansed. Okay. This is 4 verses. They packed a punch. And that's what I was saying was like getting through like the core concept of the Sermon on the Mount and seeing the Sermon on the Mount put to practice. It's huge. So, first of all, a lot of people were following him. Remember that he was speaking during the Sermon on the Mount, like to the poor, the hurt, and the suffering. And his words were electric for the time. Remember how, like we talked about, how Rome is all about like elevating those who were wealthy, who had power, who were able to make a name for themselves. And Jesus says, forget about them. You're the ones that really matter. You're the ones that get basically first entrance into the kingdom of heaven. It was an upheaval of the system, like huge, huge deal. Anyway, so I can't reemphasize that enough because we can't compare really to anything like that today, except maybe in the slightest. If you were to like be like people like Bezos, or I'm just trying to come up with like different names of famous like really rich people. Okay, Bezos, you got Zuckerberg with Facebook, you got anyone. I'm trying to think of anyone that you know what I'm saying. Bill Gates, there we go. I don't know. Oh, that guy, Elon Musk. It's like those people have what they have, but then turning to someone who's like in the, I don't know, any rescue mission, or someone who's like in a drug rehab center, or someone who lost all their possessions because their loved one died, but they spent all they had in order to keep them alive during whatever treatment they were receiving. And Christ saying, you're my first pick. And not to mention, too, was also speaking to the people of Israel. But you're getting the idea of what I'm saying. But it was like, what I'm just saying here, though, like in our modern context, like put like a times 10, like right after that, because of the dynamics of the society at that time. Now, that's the first thing. Now, what do we know? Why is leprosy? Remember there are 2 ways to look at leprosy. Either leprosy we know today, or potentially like have to do with some sort of like eczema type of a thing. So it's something like that kind of sort of. It's like it's definitely a skin disease, definitely an abnormality. If some people think it also might be the pigmentation issue that people have. So it's a skin disease. Why is that considered unclean before the Lord? What does he request in terms of sacrifice? Whenever a sacrifice has to be made, without blemish. Exactly. That's all it is. It's seen as if that person has a life force blemish. We talked about like why was it that like seminal fluid would have a problem, like if something like that would cause like uncleanliness, or like menstruation like causing uncleanliness. It's because it was seen as your life essence escaping you. And so when you have a skin blemish, like you're not whole, like you're not without. And the thing is, you have to understand, it was extremely common to be considered unclean before the Lord. But the problem with the skin was that it was like a permanent uncleanliness. To be unclean was super common, and the point of this is God created not created, but like He established the cleanliness idea because it's not because what's the phrasing there? It reflected a profound truth regarding our brokenness marked by death and sin. That it just showed our mortality. But the thing is, wait a second. It was never meant to be permanent. But the other thing was, there was a really cool line here. Oh, uncleanliness is not a threat to God, though. It's a threat to us. So I mentioned this before, is that when someone, if someone unclean were to approach God, before, they would be incinerated. Either because of something they willingly did to become unclean, or just because of their uncleanly state. And it's because, so when they approached, they were just they were gone. His fire consumed them. Here comes Jesus, though. Jesus is a human. Remember the pure mix of God and human, right? He can touch them. I can't think of Harry Potter. I can touch you now. The concept is, though, it's funny because the man with leprosy approached him and knelt before him, and he said, now remember, before this point, we breathed through Jesus' life. We even breathed through the Sermon on the Mount, right? And the first story is of an unclean man, the one who is blemished and cannot ever approach the Holy of Holies. And so you have, but he approaches the Holy of Holies and says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus doesn't say, be clean at first. He says, I want to. That's what I'm here for, basically. And he touches. And the effect of Christ's cleanliness on the disease, it was as if the disease was just evaporated from it. It's when Jesus touches the man, the uncleanliness does not affect him like one would think, based on the common, even in modern times, it's a common conception that there would be an issue. If God touched something unclean, it would defile God. No, it just destroys you. Here, though, Isaiah's vision, I forget what the Isaiah reference is, but his vision becomes a reality.
A man of unclean lips.
His vision, where he touches, there we go. And what happens is the fire of God touches and it just gets rid of all uncleanness. Thank you. And anyway, so this is why, God is not threatened by uncleanliness. So this is something, now a lot of my notes on this particular section come from a sermon I heard. And this is exactly why it's faulty to think that your sins make you not good enough to approach him. And so it's a lot of people say, why would God ever pay attention to someone like me? It's well, obviously the first person he touched was someone who couldn't approach him before. So this is he bridges the gap in that sense. Good news. So one other thing, I have one other thing here. One other thing, too, about God. So leprosy was also seen as a contagion at the time. So when Christ got rid of the contagion, he became a contagion, basically. Because instead of this sickness and evil contaminating the world, he brings a new type of contagion, basically, that completely transforms. And I thought that was a pretty cool point. So that was the first act in Matthew of healing. I think, wait a second. I think it might have been mentioned that he healed, but it wasn't really meant. No. Crowds follow. Yeah, he traveled throughout and he healed every kind of disease and illness, right? So it was mentioned before, but but the first story, that's in Matthew 4, but the first story of an actual healing, like, took place after the Sermon on the Mount when he's really putting this into practice. And, okay, Roman officer time. So, wait a second.
Unclean.
Wait a second. So Christ is doing all the things that, remember, the leaders at the time thought, you don't want to deal with the occupiers. You don't want to deal with those who are unclean. So this is interesting that the first two detailed stories of this are really turning things upside down. So,
And two, just to kind of illustrate it, it was a huge sin dealing with the Gentiles, the occupiers, the Romans, because even after all of this with Jesus, Peter had a problem with it.
Yeah.
It was that huge of an issue in their mind.
Yes. Think about us today. How often do we have, and I'm not mentioning anything specific, just think to yourself. Like preconceived notions, things that when you become a Christian, it's like your entire worldview undergoes like a complete overhaul. And it's really interesting to hear that the first two stories deal with stuff like this. And not to mention how Peter later on had issues like dealing with like the leaders and balancing that with the Romans, and then he had an issue and goes, I'll never eat this unclean meat, and God says, don't call something unclean, which I call clean.
Well, and he had to have a vision to go to see.
In order to go see a Roman, exactly.
And then the elders were on his back about it, saying, how could you do that? And he said, oh, hello, I had a vision. So yeah, it was a big issue.
Yeah, definitely. One second. All right, cool. So yeah, we got the Roman officer. Like, it's not just a Roman, but a Roman officer. I mean, that's just like, oh, can we like throw more salt onto that wound there? Anyway, when Jesus returned to Capernaum, a Roman officer came and pleaded with him, Lord, my young servant lies in bed, paralyzed and in terrible pain. Jesus said, I will come and heal him. But the officer said, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come into my home. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. I know this because I'm under the authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go, or come, and they come. And if I say to my slaves, do this, they do it. When Jesus heard this, he was stunned. He was taken aback. God himself was like, "See this part here?" And that's basically what happened. He's like, turning to those who were following him, he said, "I tell you the truth, I haven't seen things like this in all of Israel." He's preaching to the lost sheep of Israel, and he says, none of y'all are as good as this one here in terms of faith. And I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. Actually means to recline at the table with them. But many Israelites, those for whom the kingdom was prepared, will be thrown into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Very, very first of all, the weeping and gnashing of teeth usually have to do with supreme, distaste of something. Or I would guess you could say displeasure, in terms of like angry displeasure. And so resentment. It's like, have you ever been so angry at someone that you tear up and you gnash your teeth over them? We often do clenching our fists. That's a common thing in our culture. That's what this is referencing. And so, well, a lot of people are like, weeping, gnashing of teeth is like of agony. No, it's more like intense anger.
No, when they murdered Stephen, it refers to them gnashing their teeth at
There you go. Nope, that's exactly it. It's just basically like how we would, like in China, they would say he banged his head. It would be something like that. Or over here would be clenched fists and what clenched teeth? Snarl. That's another one, is snarling. And it's very similar in terms of imagery. Cultures have their different ways of presenting anger. And so this is one of them. Like I said, in China, a common thing is this. Or actually they do this. That's anger in China. And it's freaky whenever you see something like that. It's like, don't do that to me. Like that. Like that is like the utmost of anger over there. You see that.
We call it a clenched jaw.
Clenched jaw. Yeah. Oh yeah, clenched jaw. Yeah. So for them it was weeping and gnashing of teeth. So anyway, so then Jesus said to the Roman officer, "Go back home because you believe it has happened." And the young servant was healed that same hour. First of all, the Roman officer had a servant or a slave, basically, a young slave. There was, I'm not saying anything extra, there's a lot of speculation there. But what I am saying is he loved this person, an officer, loving someone under his rule. That, think about it. Like, what do you know about like anything Civil War time? It's like how often would the American slaves be beaten and brutalized? Rome was more civilized in that regard than the Americans were. They were more civilized. They treated them more like human beings. But the thing is, though, it's like to have such a strong connection like that, it's notable. And the thing is, though, it's like, so Christ is dealing with a Roman officer that has love for the people who are subjugated by him, and who risks his own reputation to go to Jesus to heal that servant. That's a huge, I guess you could say, paradigm shift. That's the word. We were talking about paradigms recently. Anyway, so this is really, really a huge story here. Now, I think I pretty much beat that one like a dead horse. I wrote down here. Jesus criticizing Israel here is hugely insulting. It's like, wait, what? Yeah, he was willing to risk everything for someone else. And this is, what did Christ do? He risked everything for all of us. So you have Christ's love reflected in a Roman officer. Anyway, so there's you got the healing here. So, all right, 14. When Jesus arrived at Peter's house, Peter's mother-in-law was sick in bed with high fever, but when Jesus touched her hand, the fever left her. Then she got up and prepared a meal for him. Hospitality. That evening, many demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. Now, remember what I said. After he won against the accuser in the wilderness, you actually have demons dealing with him. And remember what I said, from the moment that he won, they have an air of defeat. So anyway, that evening, many demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. He cast out evil spirits with a simple command, and he healed all the sick. This fulfilled the word of the Lord through the prophet Isaiah, who said, he took our sicknesses and removed our diseases. I think it's also called and remove their iniquities. And maybe that's a later reference as well. But anyway, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he instructed his disciples to cross to the other side of the lake. One of the teachers of religious, So we have all of the things happening now. He's healing people. He's casting out demons. Even Roman officers are pleading with him. But yet you have those who should know better, who come to him at this moment and say, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." But Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens to live in and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place even to lay his head." So you got a teacher of religious law saying, "I'll follow you," and he says this riddle, which is interesting because when he dealt with like the guy he showed a lot of love, he was very plain. Okay, so and then he has this riddle here. Another of his disciples said, "Lord, first let me return home and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me. Let the dead bury their own dead." It's very interesting how he changes the dynamic based on Jamie talking. So it's a very hold on here. I just want to take a look here. The thing about the woman being healed but then serving is also very representative of the gospel. It's like we get healed and then we serve others. And that's, anyway, so you also have the, hold on, I'm looking at this section here. It says, "Whoever serves me is small." Okay. I wrote this down, and this is an interesting riddle in and of itself. You can have faith and still not follow. So such as, "Whoever serves me must follow me, but anyone who loves their life will lose it." And so it's interesting here because it's like, "Let me return home and bury my father, and just follow me now that the spiritually dead bury their own dead." And it has to, and another thing too is Jesus isn't playing hide and seek ever. It's not like, "Follow me if you can find me." Like he's being very much accessible. And following Jesus is as unsettling as it is rewarding. So like this is the beginning of him the Sermon on the Mount did a great job at unsettling people. But when you're talking about, like, "I'll follow you wherever," he goes, "Okay, well, foxes have dens to live in and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place even to lay his head." That is an interesting statement, and not to mention, let the dead bury their own. Anyway. But we got this interesting section here with the storm, and then we'll take a small break after that. So you know the story of the storm. We'll get to the end of 8, and then we'll take a break. You got him getting into the boat, starting across the lake with his disciples. Suddenly a fierce storm struck the lake with waves breaking into the boat. But Jesus was sleeping with the children. I'm wondering if there is any sort of correlation between this and Jonah. Well, remember, what I said before, typically what happens is in the earthly domain, things are flipped, so such as like the soldier coming to him, or the I was talking about like other instances like where things are just like flipped on their head. Oh, Egypt not being the aggressor. But here we have him sleeping in a boat. But this time it isn't because he's trying to get away from things. Instead, the people around him are afraid, just like in Jonah. But yet when he goes up and he says, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." And instead of saying, "Oh, just throw me off," or like trying to basically this whole situation here, or having him saying, "Pray to your God, maybe he'll listen." Jesus responded, "Why are you afraid? You have so little faith." Remember, the guys on the ship in Jonah were the ones with the most faith. Jonah, he had faith, but he wouldn't listen. Like he knew things, he just didn't listen. But yet Christ said, "Don't be afraid. You have little faith. Just get more faith." Then he got up and rebuked the wind and waves, and suddenly there was great calm. remember Jonah's statement that really got the people on the ship really scared was, I worship Yahweh, the guy that created the seas above and the seas below, and the earth, and the dry land. He created the dry land and the seas. Sorry, that's how he said it. And here, instead of just like giving like I worship like anything in line with it and being bored with the idea, Christ goes up and he tells the storm to stop. The disciples were amazed. Who is this man? They asked. Even the winds and waves obey him. A lot of imagery in Scripture with God has to do with fire, wind, and water. And that's pretty much in any culture, like the whole concept of fire, wind, and water. But here, he's like a light. But anyway, you have the winds and the water, the chaos. Remember, seas are they're on a lake. Seas in and of themselves are supremely dangerous to the people at that time. They're on a lake, and they thought they were going to drown. And so even the winds and waves obey him. Last thing, we're going to go ahead and wrap up with the demon-possessed man. Pay attention to the demeanor of the spirit. When Jesus arrived on the other side of the lake in the region of the Gadarenes, two men, what was it in here? Gergesenes, yeah, Gergesenes or Gadarenes. Two men who were possessed by a demon met him. They came out of the tombs and were so violent that no one could go through the area. Anyway, they began screaming at him, "Why are you interfering with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torture us before God's appointed time?" There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding in the distance. So the demons begged, "If you cast us out, send us into that herd of pigs." "All right, go," Jesus commanded of them. So the demons came out of the men and entered the pigs, and the whole herd plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town, telling everyone what happened to the demon-possessed men. Then the entire town came out to meet Jesus, but they begged him to go away and leave them alone. So there's first of all,
That's with their economy.
right, that's exactly it. That was their only economy. But what was their economy in? Pigs. So but they're in a region that would have permitted that. But the thing is, to get these people who were like causing a ruckus out in the tomb area in the cemetery, Jesus healed them. And then it's like the herdsmen fled to nearby. So the herdsmen of the pigs were the ones who were basically saying, "You destroyed our economy." But regardless of that, he healed two people, and there's already a stir happening. There's already I heard that there are three ways that people look at Jesus in the Gospels here. One, pure astonishment, don't know what to do, like shocked beyond belief, like awed at the miraculous wonders. The second type are the ones who are utterly transformed, and the third are the type who harden their hearts. And so you have once again you have the blown away, the radically transformed, those who make their hearts even harder. And so you had like, they're like, "Thanks, but you kind of destroyed our economy, so go." And he left. But the thing is that I think that's a very interesting way of looking at that. I just want to take a look here that I got pretty much all done with my stuff. Here. The sermon series that I listened to, in Matthew 8:27, when it said the disciples were amazed, "Who is this man?" they asked, even the ways obey him. It basically is saying that this is an intentional moment for Matthew. And it's like, it's here that Matthew begs the question, who is this Jesus? It's like finding out that your friend's Spider-Man. You have to rethink everything, and the disciples became fearful of his power. And so evil is anti-life and anti-God's image. and anti-relationship. So anti-life, obviously, anti-God's image. We are the image. Anti-everything about like what makes humans truly shine. And anti-relationship. It's more than what humans do to each other. And the Bible says that evil is like a parasite in an unnatural human behavior. Talking about, have you ever done anything where you just look back and like, that wasn't me? And so that was like that. There's the Bible saying that anything that's anti-life, anti-human, anti-relationship, that's evil. Jesus' effect on demonic influence is like bugs scattering after lifting a rock. So it's like, you know, that feeling of we lifting, very similar, and that's exactly what happens to us on Sunday. And so, and it's here that Matthew demonstrates Jesus is not only the anointed one, but God Himself in the flesh. But in the end, He lets. This is a preview of coming attractions. But in the end, even though He's God in the flesh and evil scatters from before Him, He lets evil win by taking over Him. So anyway, so that's. I do need a break. I do honestly need a breather. So that's a lot of stuff that we did in an hour and 20 minutes. Okay. So I need a breather, and then we'll start like wrapping things up. But I'll see you on the other side of the break. I need a break. All right. Hi guys. I also forgot. We're back, by the way. I forgot to mention one other thing about the pigs. I have heard growing up that the evil spirits were trying to kill themselves as well. I go back and forth on it. When they were in the people who were coming out of the tombs and like creating a ruckus there, they were creating disruption. And I think that they also knew that by killing the people's means of living, that would also cause further disruption. However, it's potential that argument also makes sense as well, that they were trying to kill themselves and avoid the judgment that God had waiting for them. And so it's like I go back and forth on that one. Mom's looking up what? Yeah, who knows? Mom's looking up something else, and she's looking up exactly where this place was and if something. But she might present it next week. She said so. She's currently doing that. Now we have Jesus healing a paralyzed man. 8 verses here. Jesus climbed into a boat and went back across the lake to his own town. Some people brought him a paralyzed man on a mat. Seeing their faith, Jesus said to the paralyzed man, "Be encouraged, my child. Your sins are forgiven." All right, we'll stop there for a second. The way that Jesus is addressing this person, he is an authoritative figure by doing so. We usually balk at authority and just think of anything happening in the political realm. And we usually balk at authority, but the way that Jesus is presenting his authority is extremely loving. And it's more like the way that to look at the way that he was talking to this paralyzed man was, don't anguish. Like, don't anguish, little boy. God's not angry with you. And it's a different sense of authority here. The man grew up in a society that judged him, thinking he or his family sinned. We have covered at length that is not the case. But human society is human society. And so you have the Pharisees came from a very rigid way, and they cherry-picked just as much as Christian churches cherry-pick today what Scripture says. Anyway, wrong way. It's the wrong way of looking at it, yes, but he lived in such a culture. It was exactly what he needed to hear, was your sins are forgiven. Don't think that this exemplifies solely Jesus' idea that spiritual healing is more important. Because later on it says, like, your sins are forgiven. Oh, do you need more proof? Get up and walk, basically. No, he was using him as an example. And he said, so it says here, don't think it exemplifies that Jesus' idea is for spiritual healing. It is, but it's much more than that. He deals with every individual in a way that addresses each individual's core issues. Now, when he said, be encouraged, my child, your sins are forgiven, it says, but some of the teachers of religious law said to themselves, that's blasphemy. Remember what blasphemy is. It's putting yourself on God's level. Basically, when you had Eve taken from the fruits of the garden because she took it because it was desirable to be more wise and like God herself, even though she was like God herself, even though Adam and Eve were already very much like God herself, themselves, made in his likeness, just the fact that she took that fruit and put herself on the same playing field in her own way was blasphemous. That's what blasphemy actually means. And so we have a similar situation that when you have the teachers of religious law seeing some guy saying your sins are forgiven, they're like, whoa, who are you? Who are you to have that authority? So they actually had kind of a point. It's similar to like when we were looking at like Saul, and even though David was the anointed one, I mean technically it was Jonathan that was next up for the throne. So it was kind of like a big deal to say that David was going to be the next king. So like what I'm saying is like from a human perspective, the Pharisees were actually right here by saying, wait a second, where did you get it? Where do you think you got that authority from? You're not, like, to them, like, no human is God, basically. So like, you don't have the authority to discount sin. And so Jesus knew what they were thinking. Two things. Some people think that he knew exactly what they were thinking as if he could read their mind, or the way I like to think of it. This. Now, don't get me wrong. Did he do supernatural things? He healed people. That's supernatural. But the thing is, though, I personally feel as though, like, come on. If you say a statement such as that, you know what the Pharisees would have been thinking at that point, because they were like, whoa. Where did they? So he knew exactly what was going on. So either or both. I think it's a cool way to ponder that. So anyway, he said, why do you have such evil thoughts in your heart? Is it easier to, oh, by the way, that's another example of how the ancient people used to think that thinking was in the heart. Anyway, why do you have such evil thoughts in your heart? Is it easier to say your sins are forgiven or stand up and walk? So I will prove to you that the Son of Man, that's a huge statement, he always calls himself the Son of Man, that the Son of Man has the authority on earth to forgive sins. Then Jesus turned to the paralyzed man and said, stand up, pick up your mat, and go home. And the man jumped up. He didn't just stand up, he jumped up and went home. So, fear. So remember the reactions that people had. Fear swept through the crowd as they saw this happen. And they praised God for giving humans such authority. So it goes right back to the concept of, like, who are you? Like, where do you get this authority from? And now a human has this authority. That's what I'm searching right now, and I don't know if you want to present that or not.
I'm forming an idea here. I might research it out more this week.
Okay.
But I'm looking at where Gadara and Gergesa, Gergesa. So the Gadarene, it's an area from the mid-eastern to the southeastern Sea of Galilee. It's in the Decapolis.
Yeah.
And that might be why
people attended the Sermon on the Mount. They were also from the Decapolis, a lot of people.
Yeah, they were a large mixture of Gentiles in there. And be like Romans and Gentiles, probably like
it was like a
Samaritans mixed down, yeah.
Melting pot.
Yeah, and that would be also, the Decapolis also included Nazareth. So that might be why they looked down on Jesus and saying, did anything good ever come out of Nazareth? Yeah, so, yeah, but what I'm thinking is, it's just, I don't know, hogs wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But they would have been huge if there were that many hogs running around. They would have been huge in the economy. Also, I think the people would have been very superstitious, and probably with good reason. but if he cast out the demons, I mean, as a person, if I were one of those people, I'd be like, uh-oh, this guy might be more trouble than the demons. Because if he casts them out, if he could be a god that's
vindictive,
meddlesome, yeah, and more like the gods of the surrounding nations that just cause a lot of trouble. Or B, if he's killing all the swine here, and swine being against the dietary laws, if he's going to be in town judging us, we really don't want him here.
Mm-hmm.
So,
True.
I mean, that's just a few ideas, that just human nature involved. They might, that's not to say that's the whole reason, but that might just be part of why they said, please, it's okay,
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
However, I want to make a parallel to what that concept was like with the fear aspect. Is here, after the paralyzed man was healed, they were fearful, but then that fear turns to worship. And it gets more interesting. Let's see what we can get before I have to run out the door. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. "Follow me and be my disciple," Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home and dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with scum?" When Jesus heard this, he said, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do." Then he added, "Now go and learn the meaning of this scripture." He's talking to the people who actually know scripture like the back of their hand. Remember this.
Did you ever read that?
Now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifice. We talked about this. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. God's not waiting around for prostitutes and tax collectors to make sacrifices. He's coming to them directly. And so this is a huge point here. And I did have to say this. This is a really cool note. Basically, Jesus is as far away from a devout Jew as they come. And that is, he's Jewish. But he's as far away as from a pious, devout Jew as they come. And it says here, Matthew was like a member of the mafia. He was basically like a mafia. Tax collectors were known not only to basically take taxes, but to get extra amounts from the taxes that they took. And how they would do this is by coercion, beating people up, or having people taken care of. And so the thing is, though, through threats, they were very much despised. We don't want tax collectors today. Once again, though, amplify that by about 1 billion. That's what you get.
Only 1 billion?
Because, not to mention, tax collectors were Jews. They were ethnic Jews that were seen as betraying the Jewish people by serving their overlords. And that's a key point there. Anyway, so oh yeah, by the way, one cool fact, terrible fact, but one cool fact. Roman coins often depicted the oppression of Jews. You would see the subjugation of Jews on coins. They're great exploits. Anyway, not to mention, we're soon getting to the point of where the apostles come into play. Matthew's not the only one. So remember, Matthew served the overlord. If you look at chapter 10, 3 lines away from where Matthew is mentioned, you have a zealot. Interesting. And the zealot, remember, is the type of person that would have associated themselves with the Maccabean revolt. Like, they were seen as, like, the Robin Hoods of the time. And they would stay in the hill country, and they would, like, spy out the Romans, and they would attack them and run back into the hills. And they would slaughter Romans. And instead you have Matthew, who would be the type of person who would have Jewish people beaten up. So you're noticing that Jesus goes after these people, and he gets a hodgepodge of various backgrounds with him. Anyway, so who's in and out of the circle on that one? Anyway, one other interesting thing about the apostles, Judas is the last name mentioned, and Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed him, and all the names mentioned, and all the types of things available, Judas seems to be the closest to him in character. Isn't that interesting? Talking about his background, the type of person that Judas was on face value was much like Jesus and the zealots, the tax collectors. It's funny that the ones he seemed closest, that's why it was a huge blow to Christ when Judas turned on him. Anyway. Yeah, and this is also making the point of that Jesus moves to the sinners first. He doesn't wait around. Anyway, discussion about fasting. One day the disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus and asked him, why don't your disciples fast like we do and the Pharisees do? John baptized him. This is the beginning of doubt happening here. Remember later when John asked, he's like, wait, are you really the guy? So, because he was expecting something more revolutionary as well. So, anyway, more earthly revolutionary. Jesus replied, do wedding guests mourn while celebrating with the groom? Of course not, but someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. Besides, who would patch old clothing with new cloth? For the new patch would shrink and rip away from the old cloth, leaving an even bigger tear than before. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. The old skins would burst from the pressure, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. New wine is stored in new wineskins so that both are preserved. He's making a lot of points here, talking about we had the old, it served its purpose, but now the wine is fresh. So let's make a new skin for the wine, essentially. There's a new wineskin. Anyway. So it's like if you would patch old clothes with new cloth, just make a new piece of clothing. This concept is a huge point here. So that's why Paul gets so aggravated in Galatians, because he's like, dude, you're going back to the concept that enslaved you in the first place, and so this is what's happening as well with Jesus when he's talking about the wineskins. We're going to continue on. We're almost done with this chapter, and then we will call it a day. As Jesus was saying this, the leader of a synagogue came and knelt before him. A leader of a synagogue. Interesting. Consider it something like a pastor kind of sort of. My daughter has just died, he said, but you can bring her back to life again if you just come and lay your hand on her. So Jesus and his disciples got up and went with him. Just then a woman who had suffered for 12 years of constant bleeding came up behind him. She touched the fringe of his robe, for she thought, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be discouraged. Your faith has made you well. And the woman was healed at that moment. When Jesus arrived at the official's home, he saw the noisy crowd and heard the funeral music. Get out, he told them. The girl isn't dead. She's only asleep. But the crowd laughed at him. After the crowd was put outside, however, Jesus went up and took the girl by the hand, and she stood up. The report of this miracle swept through the entire countryside. Okay. Breaking things down here. I forgot to mention something about the leper guy. I might be wrong, but I think that Jesus' healing of the leper is the first time ever in Scripture that leprosy is utterly healed, except for when God causes leprosy, and then it's removed, such like during Moses.
Naaman.
And Naaman?
Naaman was healed of leprosy.
Did he have it his whole life?
I don't know.
And there are other.
I doubt he had it.
There's something having to do with like this is like a huge deal. That it was leprosy that was the first one. I might be wrong. But I remember something very important about that. Anyway, so we're talking about like what the.
I think what's interesting. I think Elisha is seen as a type of Christ. To have healed a leper, I think would be.
Yeah, I think it's pretty along the same line. Yeah. But like Jesus takes it to the next level.
Right.
Because like he keeps doing it. Like Elijah and Elisha would have like moments, but like he is doing it everywhere he goes. That's huge.
Elisha fed crowds.
That's right, in a smaller crowd. Yep. Anyway, no, I'm just taking a look here. Touching death normally makes you unclean. Allowing a bleeding woman to touch him would make you unclean. It's funny because think about it. There was a ritual that if you were made unclean, you would have to do it. But Jesus doesn't do it. That rubs people the wrong way too, as we will talk about later. Jesus not only has compassion in the English sense, he absorbs it within himself. Like so for example, the bleeding woman essentially, like when the woman touches it in Luke, it's depicted as he absorbs her. Like there's something about like when she touched it, like he felt his power leave him and enter her, and so he's absorbed. It's like a sponge, and it's just like it just goes away. It's really crazy stuff. So anyway, I can imagine why crowds followed him. Like I can totally see why crowds followed him, and he definitely very quickly had a name for himself, like going about. Anyway, last part, 2 parts. Sorry. After Jesus left the girl's home, the two blind men followed along behind him, shouting, "Son of David, have mercy on us." They went right into the house where he was staying, and Jesus asked them, "Do you believe I can make you see?" "Yes, Lord," they told him, "we do." Then he touched their eyes and said, "Because of your faith, it will happen." Then their eyes were opened and they could see. Jesus sternly warned them, "Don't tell anyone about this." He really was trying to keep things under wraps for a little bit. He really was. He did a terrible job at it. I'll have to say that anyway. But instead, they went out into the same almost for their region. When they left, a demon-possessed man who couldn't speak was brought to Jesus. So Jesus cast out the demon, and then the man began to speak. The crowds were amazed. Nothing like this has ever happened in Israel, they exclaimed. Or was it demon possession? No one had ever put demons away. I'm wondering if that's what it was. Because this is nothing like this has ever happened in Israel, they exclaimed. The Pharisees said he can cast out demons because he's empowered by the prince of demons. Anyway, so we're talking about the blind. They see Christ for who he really is. That's an interesting part there. Talking about seeing and the connection between seeing and, remember, the hearing and all that stuff. So we got that. So the blind see Jesus for who he really is. Jesus shatters people's concepts, and he's redefining everything. He's redefining everything. And the thing about the Pharisees, they couldn't deny what happened right in front of their faces. And they've never seen anything like it before either. But their minds were already made up. That's a big point. Faith these terms is a major point of these reactions. But faith makes you vulnerable as well. Like that type of Christian faith, it makes you vulnerable. And it's funny too that like no, that it's not very relevant here. Hold on. I have a note here that verse 35 is very similar to the closing of chapter 4. So let's take a look at chapter. It's talking about him healing. The close of chapter 4 is where it's like large crowds followed him wherever he went. People from Galilee, the 10 towns, Decapolis, Jerusalem, from all over Judea, from the east of the Jordan River. Then you have Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness, just like in 4:17. It's interesting. You can see the very intentional links to things. And notice that what happens right after this is the beginning of him sending others out. So this is where we're going to start closing things up here. So anyway, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. Remember that the Hebrew word means womb, or it's based on the word for womb, and it's like he called people daughter. Like when the woman touched him, he called her daughter, right? Anyway, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He said to his disciples, "The harvest is great." Here it begins. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who's in charge of the harvest and ask him to send more workers into his field. What happens right after that? It's the beginning of the disciples, like the beginning of the apostles, actually. And so there's like the greatest of the disciples with the apostles. And so you got, I think that's pretty much the place to wrap it up for this week. It's not as if we didn't do anything. Any final comments before I close it? I have to be out of here in 10 minutes. Like, I mean, out of the apartment in 10 minutes. But we have a good solid 5 minutes here. So, perfect. Okay. This was fun.
Just a really fascinating study today. I really enjoyed that, Joel.
Thank you. It's really funny because we're getting into nitty-gritty stuff, and I love this stuff. Although what I like about it, too, is that stuff that we studied before is starting to come back to play, and it's going to get better. So I'm excited about this. So,
one quick thing. I thought it was interesting that Jesus was going out and he was healing people and he was talking with people, but when the scribe came to him, he answers them with a riddle like, okay, Dr. Scribe,
there you go. You know, so I forgot to mention that. I meant to mention that. You're right.
Okay, Mr. Wordplay, riddle me this.
Yeah, I forgot. That was totally, I knew.
Because we've been talking about the wordplay with the scribe.
When we talked about that, I knew I wanted to sit. That was exactly it. It was because I knew that when the scribes come into play, he really starts using riddles with them. And that's absolutely the case. Because remember, the Old Testament is made in the form of riddles. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, riddle me this. Yeah. So, all right. Let's go ahead and give it to the Lord on this one, and we'll call it a day because I got to run. All right. Father, thank you. I am so vitalized when it comes to like going through like the whole concept of like you showing us what your kingdom is truly like. Thank you for bending our brains. Thank you for showing us the right way. Thank you for showing us that the way that we so often see the world is a lie. And so we thank you for showing us the truth, for riddling us different questions, making us see that it's worth changing everything to follow you. Father, we ask that our faith explode this week and that our willingness to follow and follow without question. To follow, because I said as soon as I said without question, I was like, well, like you asked for us to question it. You know what I'm saying. Guide us. Make us so passionate and bold when it comes to following you. That when questions arise, we boldly look at them and see you throughout it all. We ask your hand of grace and peace upon all those attending and watching. We thank you for allowing us to come together even after I had to change the schedule. We just thank you for allowing us to preserve this the same time next week as far as 7 o'clock is concerned. And we just thank you for holding us together all this time. We come to you with our hands open, full of praises in your name. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. All right, let me turn off the recording.